Hi, my name is Tyler Stallman, and today I want to walk you through some of my basic workflow elements, especially right after I do a shoot. Yesterday I went around downtown Calgary with my friend Glenn, and we did some photos, mostly using 50mm 1.2 lens and a 135 2.0. So some of the interesting problems from this type of shoot are lack of control on your lighting and low depth of field, which leads to quite a few shots that are out of focus. So the first thing I do, obviously, is import my photos, which I have already done here. To give you the basics of what I do, I use an import preset that I just call standard, and I have another one that's archive, but right now we'll just deal with the standard. So currently it doesn't see any photos on the card that I have in there, which is fine, but the basics are that I render my previews at standard, don't import suspected duplicates. I don't usually make a second copy, although I know I should, but I don't have enough hard drive space for it most of the time. I like to rename my files with the template of date and file name so that the final names that every file has is completely unique. Often you can run into trouble down the road if you've got a lot of files that have exactly the same name, which happens when your camera resets the counter. So it'll start being like image 0001 again. And then when you try to move files around, sometimes you'll find conflicts. So I like that. Sometimes I'll add in some keywords. I always add in my basic metadata about me, which you can create a new preset here. I won't go through that now, but it's useful for adding your copyright and some other elements. And finally, choosing where to put it, which the basics of my storage are that I have a working hard drive called Pictures HD, and that's an internal hard drive on my Mac Pro. And then I also have an external Drobo that is synced to the new updates every night of what I add to that Pictures hard drive. So anyway, I now have these photos in here from yesterday's shoot with no adjustments, no sorting. And so first thing we need to do is go through and do some basic sorting. This isn't going to be a very thorough job right now. I just want to pick out a few that we'll look at. And I'd like to do my first round of sorting with just looking at small-ish previews. The idea being that if it can't impress me in a small thumbnail, it's not going to impress anybody on the website. It's got to stand out. Things like composition, the lighting, and the pose need to stand on their own without looking at detail. So I quickly will run through, and anything that seems like it's going to work for me, I'll just add a 1 star to. I'm not very discriminating with this, so there'll end up being a lot of 1 stars at the end of any shoot. These are the photos that I'd be willing to show to people, basically, that I don't find embarrassing. So I'm not going to go through the whole day. I'll just guess at a few of these here. What looks good to me? Alright, so we've got a bit of a selection now. I'll also add rejection flags to anything that is obviously a problem, like blinking or really visible out of focus, and eventually I'll go through and delete all those. Other than that, I keep everything. I keep all the mediocre shots. I just delete things that are terrible. So let's grab a few more 1 stars here. And we'll filter it down to just those. That's what this does here. It only displays things with 1 star rating or higher. Now, next I'm going to want to choose my 2 stars. 2 to me means that I really may end up using this photo, especially for things like stock. And then 3 means that it stands out as a portfolio piece. So I'll use each number less and less as I go through. But for my 2s, I definitely want to see it at 100%. But I don't want to be too affected by things like minor exposure issues. So at a smaller size, I'll quickly go through. Oops. I'll quickly go through and make basic adjustments. These don't need to be dead on. They just need to take away my bias from not selecting a photo because of some small issue that could easily be resolved in Photoshop. The two key elements at this point are exposure and white balance. And both of those things I judge entirely on the skin tone of the person in the photo. I used to think about exposure as the overall everything that I'm looking at here. But if we look at these are quite backlit. And if I go for a properly exposed background, it looks something like that. Clearly, what we want to see here is Glenn's face. So if I lose a little bit of detail in the background, that's fine with me. I think this one's a bit out of focus, but we can still use it as a reference. So same thing for temperature. I want his skin tone to look right. There isn't any hard science to getting correct skin tones. It's all in the eye of the beholder. I used to adjust photos for a photo lab, and that's kind of where I learned my judgment, but you'll have to develop it a bit for yourself. I think that looks about right. But generally I jump back and forth a bit between warming it, cooling it, and I go a bit too far in each direction until I think I've landed on a comfortable medium. In this case, I'd say it's a little too saturated for my taste, but that'll fix in Photoshop. If I have a set of photos that all have that same lighting and need the same adjustments, I can sync the settings, which in this case I only want to sync white balance and exposure, although I didn't change anything, so I could have done them all. That's a bit too much for these. So after I've gone through and just done really quick basic adjustments to the whole set of 1 stars, there we go. Then I'll start going through and looking at them bigger and deciding on 2 stars. Oops. At this point, I'm looking at focus a little bit more, and more on the nuances of facial expressions. Things like this, I wouldn't have noticed that he was making such a goofy face in the thumbnail, so now I can reject it. That I would actually reject, because it's a silly face. But a lot of these seem like they're pretty close to in focus. I think I'll give that 2 stars. Maybe that one. And generally I want to cut the amount of my photos down to at least 1/3 of the initial 1 star set. And I really like to not be held up on this too long, although it's also really important. But that's why I have this multi-pass filtration system, where I go over everything a few times. Ideally these thumbnails would be loaded. I think it's actually having some conflicts with my screen recording software right now is why they're not loading in the previews, so I'm not going to have perfectly accurate renders for everything here. But anyway, once we've chosen a few, then what I'll do, oh, we're almost at the end. I'll just get to the end here. Yeah, 2 stars, 2 stars. Oh, is that blurry? I can't tell. That one's not. That one is. All right, so we've got a few 2 stars. Now I'll use the filter again. Now we're only looking at the 2-star images. So you'll notice I jump around a lot between the close-up view and grid view, which is G to get back to this grid. And I like to use the keyboard a lot to jump back and forth between different screens. Once I've got a selection like this, I'll do my 3 stars, things that really stand out and that I am certain that I want to edit. Anyway, I'm having a tough time making real choices because of the lack of previews, but once I've down to a few 3 stars, I'll choose the ones. I'll usually edit by my favorite, basically. You can edit them in any order you want, but I'll do a few basic adjustments in Lightroom, which are limited generally to exposure and white balance, and the rest I like to leave for Photoshop. So anyway, those are the basics of my Lightroom file management. I'm Tyler Stallman, and if you want to check out more of my videos, go to stallman.com and tell me what you think. Thanks. Bye.